Jake Morrison stood at the window of the human ship and watched the alien world grow bigger before his eyes. The planet below looked like a giant crystal ball covered in tall, shining towers that reached up to the clouds. He had never seen anything so beautiful or so strange in all his years as a space diplomat. The ship captain walked up behind him and put a hand on his shoulder. Captain Lisa Brooks had been flying missions to alien worlds for 20 years, but even she looked nervous about this one. The Zephyrian Empire controlled 12 star systems and had never let humans visit their home world before. "Are you ready for this, Jake?" she asked quietly. "These aliens are not like the others we have met. They are proud, and they do not like visitors much. Their emperor has ruled for over 500 years, and his queen has been by his side for just as long." Jake nodded and straightened his blue diplomatic uniform. He was 32 years old and had been chosen for this mission because of his skill with languages and his calm nature. The other diplomats on the team were older and more experienced, but Jake had something special. He could make friends with anyone, and he never got angry even when things went wrong. "I have read all the files about their culture," Jake said. "The Zephyrians value strength and power above everything else. Their society is built like a pyramid with the royal family at the top and everyone else below them. The emperor and queen have no children, which makes some people think their marriage is not very happy." The ship shook slightly as they entered the atmosphere. Through the window, Jake could see flying vehicles moving between the crystal towers like bright fish swimming through coral. The buildings were made of some kind of clear material that caught the light and threw rainbows in all directions. "Landing in 5 minutes," came the voice from the bridge. "All diplomatic team members report to the exit bay." Jake gathered his things and walked through the ship corridors. The other 3 humans on the diplomatic team were already waiting by the door. There was Dr. Helen Carter, who knew everything about alien biology, Commander Roy Davis, who was their military advisor, and Ambassador Patricia Stone, who would lead all the official talks. Ambassador Stone looked at each of them with serious eyes. "Remember what we practiced," she said. "Do not look directly at the Emperor until he speaks to you first. Do not touch anything unless they say you can. And whatever you do, do not mention our democratic government. They think democracy is weakness." The ship touched down with a soft bump, and the door opened with a hiss. Jake felt his heart beat faster as warm alien air flowed into the ship. The air smelled like flowers and metal mixed together. Outside the ship was a group of tall alien beings waiting for them. The Zephyrians looked almost human, but their skin had a slight blue tint, and their eyes were larger and completely black. They wore long robes made of shimmering fabric that changed color when they moved. The leader of the aliens stepped forward and spoke in perfect English. "Welcome to Zephyria, humans from Earth. I am High Minister Corvin. The Emperor and Queen are waiting for you in the palace. Please follow me and do not wander from the path." They walked through streets paved with smooth stones that seemed to glow from within. Jake looked around in wonder at the alien city. The buildings were works of art with curved walls and flowing designs that defied gravity. Gardens grew on the sides of towers with plants that sparkled like jewels. The other humans kept their eyes straight ahead and walked in formation, like soldiers, but Jake could not help himself. He stopped at a fountain where water danced in the air without falling and made shapes like birds and butterflies. A group of young Zephyrians had gathered to watch the water show, and they giggled when they saw Jake staring in amazement. "Beautiful," Jake said to them in their own language. He had studied Zephyrian for months preparing for this mission. The young aliens looked surprised that a human could speak their words, and they smiled at him. "High Minister," Corvin noticed that Jake had stopped and walked back with an annoyed expression. "Human diplomat, you must stay with the group." The Emperor does not like to be kept waiting. Sorry, Jake said. Your city is just so amazing. I have never seen anything like this fountain. How does the water stay in the air like that? The High Minister looked confused by the question. Most visitors either ignored the fountain or demanded to know if it was a weapon. No one had ever asked about how it worked because they thought it was beautiful. It uses sound waves to hold the water, Corvin said slowly. Our artists have been making these water sculptures for thousands of years. That is incredible, Jake said with genuine excitement. Your people must be very creative and skilled. On Earth, we have fountains too, but nothing like this. I would love to learn more about Zephyrian art. Something changed in the High Minister's face. His stern expression softened slightly, and he looked at Jake with curiosity instead of suspicion. Perhaps later there will be time, he said, but now we must go to the palace. They continued walking through the city, and Jake noticed that more and more Zephyrians had come out to watch the human visitors pass by. Unlike humans who might wave or call out greetings, the aliens stood silently and observed everything with their dark eyes. The palace rose before them like a mountain made of crystal. It was the largest building Jake had ever seen, with hundreds of towers and bridges connecting different sections. Guards in armor that looked like it was made from silver liquid stood at every entrance. The Emperor and Queen will receive you. In the great hall, High Minister Corvin said as they climbed wide steps toward massive doors, Remember your manners and speak only when spoken to. Jake felt nervous butterflies in his stomach as the doors opened and they walked into the palace. The great hall was enormous, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadows. Pillars of colored crystal supported balconies where hundreds of Zephyrian nobles watched the proceedings. At the far end of the hall were two thrones carved from what looked like solid diamond. On the left throne sat Emperor Vorthik, a tall, imposing figure with skin darker blue than the others, and eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. He wore a crown of black metal and robes that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue. On the right throne sat Queen Lysandra, and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. She was the most beautiful being he had ever seen, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow and long silver hair that flowed around her shoulders like liquid starlight. But her dark eyes held a sadness that touched something deep in Jake's heart. Emperor stood, and his voice filled the great hall like thunder. So, the humans from Earth have finally come to visit our empire. We shall see if you are worthy of our attention. The next morning brought news that made Ambassador Stone pace nervously in their guest quarters. Emperor Vorthik had announced that the humans must prove their worth through traditional Zephyrian challenges before any trade agreements could be discussed. This was not part of the plan, Stone muttered as she read the message from High Minister Corvin. The Emperor wants to test our strength, intelligence, and cunning through their ancient games. If we fail, they will send us away and never speak to humans again. Jake sat quietly at the window, watching Zephyrian children play in the courtyard below. They were playing a game that looked like tag, but the children could run up walls and across ceilings as if gravity meant nothing to them. He smiled as one small girl laughed with pure joy when she caught her friend. What kind of challenges? Commander Davis asked. He was already checking his weapons, even though they had been told no violence would be allowed in the palace. Dr. Carter looked up from her alien biology notes. I have been studying their culture all night. The Zephyrians believe that strength comes from individual excellence. Their tests are designed to find the strongest, smartest, and most ruthless person in any group. The winner gets respect, and the losers get ignored. Ambassador Stone stopped pacing and looked at her team. Then we need to decide who will compete. In each challenge, Roy, you are obviously our strongest. Helen, you have the highest intelligence scores. and I have the most experience with alien negotiations." "What about Jake?" Dr. Carter asked. Everyone turned to look at him, but he was still watching the children play. "Jake is good with languages and cultural studies," Stone said. "But these challenges sound like they need specialists. We cannot afford to lose this opportunity." An hour later, they were escorted to a massive arena beneath the palace. The walls were lined with thousands of Zephyrian spectators who had come to watch the humans be tested. Emperor Vorthik sat in a golden box high above the arena floor, while Queen Lysandra sat beside him looking bored and sad. High, Minister Corvin stood in the center of the arena and raised his arms for silence. "Today, we test the humans in 3 sacred challenges. First is the trial of strength, where they must move the stone of burden from one end of the arena to the other. Second is the puzzle of minds, where they must solve the ancient riddle that has stood for 1,000 years. Third is the combat of honor, where they must face our greatest warrior in single battle." Jake looked at the stone of burden and felt his heart sink. It was a massive block of black rock that looked like it weighed as much as a small building. Commander Davis stepped forward with confidence, but when he tried to lift the stone, it would not budge even an inch. He strained and grunted and turned red in the face, but the stone might as well have been part of the floor. The Zephyrian crowd began to whisper and laugh. Some called out insults about human weakness. Emperor Vorthik leaned forward with interest, while Queen Lysandra looked away as if she felt embarrassed for them. Jake walked over to Davis and put a hand on his shoulder. "Let me try something," he said quietly. "Jake, you are not as strong as I am," Davis protested. "If I cannot move it, you certainly cannot." But Jake was not looking at the stone. He was looking at the other competitors. There were 3 young Zephyrian nobles who would also attempt the challenge, and they were all standing around looking nervous. Jake walked over to them and spoke in their language. "Hello, my name is Jake. This stone looks very heavy. I am not strong enough to move it alone. Would you like to work together?" The 3 aliens looked shocked. No one had ever suggested cooperation in the trial of strength before. The whole point was to prove individual superiority. "But this is a competition," one of them said. "We are supposed to compete against each other." "Why?" Jake asked. "The goal is to move the stone from one place to another. If we work together, we can all succeed. If we compete, most of us will fail." The youngest of the Zephyrians, a female with bright purple eyes, stepped forward. "I am Kara. I think the human makes sense. My father always told me that a wise leader knows when to ask for help." The other 2 aliens looked uncertain, but when Jake and Kira began examining the stone together, they slowly joined in. Jake noticed that the stone had smooth areas on each side that looked like they were meant for hands to grip. "I think this stone was designed to be moved by multiple people," he said. "Look at these handholds. There are 6 of them, which means 6 people working together. But that would mean the whole challenge is about cooperation, not individual strength," said one of the male aliens. "Maybe your ancestors were wiser than you thought," Jake replied with a smile. The 4 of them positioned themselves around the stone and lifted together. To everyone's amazement, the stone rose easily from the ground. It was heavy, but not impossible when 4 people shared the weight. They carried it across the arena together, while the crowd watched in stunned silence. Emperor Vorthik stood up from his throne with an angry expression, but Queen Lysandra was leaning forward with curiosity and something that might have been admiration in her dark eyes. The second challenge was the puzzle of minds. A complex mechanical device was brought into the arena, covered with spinning wheels, sliding panels, and glowing symbols. For 1,000 years, individual Zephyrians had tried to solve it alone and failed. Dr. Carter stepped forward, but Jake gently took her arm. "May I try something first?" he asked. He walked over to the crowd of spectators and called out in Zephyrian, "People of Zephyria, your ancestors built this puzzle. Surely someone here knows stories about how it works. Would anyone like to share what they know?" An old Zephyrian in the crowd stood up slowly. "My grandfather told me stories," she called out in a shaky voice. "He said the puzzle represents the harmony of all Zephyrian clans working together." A middle-aged male joined in. "My family has a legend that says each symbol represents a different virtue that must be balanced with the others." Soon dozens of Zephyrians were sharing family stories and ancestral knowledge about the puzzle. Jake listened carefully and began to see a pattern. Instead of trying to solve the puzzle as one person fighting against a machine, he began to think of it as a conversation between all the different parts, working with the knowledge shared by the crowd. Jake began to turn wheels and slide panels, not in competition with each other, but in harmony. The puzzle responded with musical tones and growing light until finally it opened. Like a flower revealing a beautiful crystal heart at its center dot, the arena erupted in cheers, but Emperor Vorthik looked furious. He had expected the humans to fail and prove their inferiority. Instead, Jake had turned both challenges into celebrations of cooperation and community knowledge. "Enough," the Emperor roared. "The final challenge will show the truth. Combat cannot be shared or cooperated. The human must face our champion alone." A massive Zephyrian warrior entered the arena wearing armor that sparkled like diamond and carrying weapons that hummed with energy. He was twice Jake's size and moved with the deadly grace of a professional killer. Jake looked at the warrior, and then at the crowd, and finally at Queen Lysandra. For the first time that day, she was looking directly at him with an expression he could not read. "I accept the challenge," Jake said, "but I choose the terms of combat." Emperor Vorthik laughed harshly. "You think you can dictate terms to us, weak human? According to your own laws, the challenged party may choose weapons and conditions," Jake replied calmly. "I choose hand-to-hand combat with no weapons, and I choose to fight not to defeat my opponent, but to protect someone else." He pointed to Kira, the young Zephyrian who had helped him move the stone. "I will fight to defend her honor against any attack." The crowd murmured in confusion. No one had ever requested to fight for protection instead of dominance. The warrior looked puzzled, but took a fighting stance. What happened next surprised everyone. Instead of attacking, Jake positioned himself between the warrior and Kira. When the warrior moved to go around him, Jake moved to block. When the warrior tried to push past, Jake gently redirected his force without causing harm. For 10 minutes, Jake never threw a punch or attempted to hurt his opponent. He simply prevented any harm from reaching the person he had chosen to protect. Finally, the warrior stopped and removed his helmet. "I cannot defeat someone who will not fight me," he said with respect in his voice. "You have shown a kind of strength we do not understand but cannot deny." Queen Lysandra stood up from her throne, and for the first time in centuries, she spoke without permission from her husband. "The human has won all 3 challenges by showing us something we had forgotten. True strength comes from bringing people together, not driving them apart." Emperor Vorthik's face turned dark with rage, but he could not argue. By the laws of his own empire, Jake had passed every test. But something had changed in the great arena that day, and the Emperor knew his absolute power had been challenged in a way he did not understand. 3 days had passed since the challenges, and Jake found himself walking through the palace gardens more often than he probably should. Ambassador Stone was deep in trade negotiations with the Emperor's ministers, while Commander Davis studied Zephyrian military technology, and Dr. Carter learned about their medical advances. But Jake felt drawn to explore the quieter parts of the Crystal Palace. The gardens were different from anything on Earth. Plants, grew in impossible spirals, reaching toward twin suns that painted everything in golden and silver light. Flowers sang softly when the wind touched them, and trees bore fruit that glowed like tiny stars. Jake was sketching one of the singing flowers when he heard footsteps behind him. "You are the human who made my people remember what they had forgotten," came a voice like music. Jake turned to see Queen Lysandra walking toward him alone, without the usual crowd of servants and guards that followed her everywhere. Jake quickly stood and bowed, the way Ambassador Stone had taught him. "Your Majesty, I am honored by your presence. I hope I am not somewhere I should not be." Lysandra smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Jake had seen from her since they arrived. "These are my private gardens. I come here when I need to think, or when the palace feels too small for my thoughts. You may call me Lysandra when we are alone." "Thank you," Jake said. "Your gardens are incredibly beautiful. On Earth, we have gardens, too, but nothing like this. How do you make the flowers sing?" "The same way your people make music with instruments," Lysandra replied. "The flowers have hollow chambers in their petals that vibrate when air passes through them. My ancestors bred them for thousands of years to create different tones and harmonies." Jake listened carefully to the flower songs and began to hear patterns and melodies. "It sounds like they are telling stories," he said. Lysandra looked surprised. "You can hear that? Most people just hear pretty sounds, but you are right. Each flower remembers the emotions of the person who planted it. This garden holds the feelings and memories of every queen who came before me." They walked together through paths lined with crystal stones that reflected the light in rainbow patterns. Jake asked questions about the plants and architecture, while Lysandra shared stories about the history of each section. She had not talked to anyone about her gardens in decades, and found herself enjoying the conversation more than she expected. "Tell me about your world," Lysandra said as they sat beside a pond where fish made of living light swam in gentle circles. "What are human gardens like?" Jake thought about the small park near his childhood home, where his mother used to take him to feed ducks. "Much simpler than this, but just as loved. My mother had a vegetable garden where she grew tomatoes and beans, and flowers to attract butterflies. She always said that gardens are places where hope grows." "Hope," Lysandra repeated the word slowly. "That is not something we speak of much in the palace. The Emperor believes hope makes people weak and content with less than they deserve. My mother believed hope makes people strong enough to work for something better," Jake said. "She was a teacher, and she used to say that hope is what lets children believe they can become anything they want to be." Lysandra was quiet for a long moment, watching the light fish swim. "I have not thought about what I wanted to be in over 300 years, she said softly. "When I was young, before I married the Emperor, I wanted to be an artist. I dreamed of creating beautiful things that would make people happy." "What kind of art?" Jake asked. "Stories told in light and sound, like the flowers, but more complex. I wanted to create experiences that would help people understand each other better." Lysandra touched one of the singing flowers, and it responded with a sad, lonely melody. "The Emperor said such dreams were foolish and beneath my royal status." "They do not sound foolish to me," Jake said. "They sound like the dreams of someone who cares about making the world better." Over the following days, Jake and Lysandra met often in the gardens. She showed him hidden sections where rare plants from other worlds grew in carefully controlled environments. He told her about Earth's diverse cultures and the human belief that everyone deserves the chance to pursue their dreams. Their friendship deepened when news arrived that changed everything. A group of refugee ships had appeared at the edge of the Zephyrian system, carrying survivors from a war-torn planet called Nexus Prime. The ships held mostly children whose parents had died in the fighting. Emperor Vorthic's response was swift and cold. "Turn them away," he commanded. We have no room for weak refugees in our empire. Let them find help elsewhere. Jake was shocked by the callousness of the decision. Those are children with nowhere else to go, he said to Ambassador Stone. We have to do something. Jake, we are here as diplomats, not rescuers, Stone replied. We cannot interfere with internal Zephyrian decisions, or we will destroy any chance of a treaty. But Jake could not accept leaving innocent children to die in space. That evening he found Lysandra in her gardens, looking more troubled than he had ever seen her. You heard about the refugees, she said, without looking at him. Yes, I am sorry your husband made that choice. Lysandra turned to face him with pain in her dark eyes. He is not making the choice alone. As queen, I have the power to grant sanctuary. To refugees in distress? I have always let him speak for both of us, but I do not have to. What would happen if you overruled his decision? Jake asked. There would be consequences, Lysandra said. The Emperor does not like to be contradicted, especially not in public. But those are children, Jake. When I was young, before I learned to keep my opinions to myself, I would never have let children suffer to preserve political appearances. Jake could see the war happening inside her between centuries of trained obedience and her own conscience. What would you need to save them? He asked. Ships to bring them to the surface, medical supplies for the sick ones, and places for them to stay while we find permanent homes, Lysandra said. The Emperor would never authorize any of it. But the human delegation might, Jake said thoughtfully. We have medical supplies on our ship, and our captain is authorized to provide humanitarian aid in emergency situations. Lysandra stared at him. You would risk your diplomatic mission to help alien children you have never met. Of course, Jake said as if the question surprised him. They are children who need help. What else matters? That night, Jake convinced Captain Brooks to authorize an unofficial rescue mission. Using human resources and Lysandra's royal authority, they secretly brought the refugee children to a hidden facility in the palace's outer districts. Jake worked alongside Zephyrian volunteers to distribute food and medical care, while Lysandra used her personal funds to provide shelter and supplies, not for 3 days. They worked together to care for over 200 young refugees from a dozen different alien species. Jake watched Lysandra transform from a sad, resigned queen into a passionate leader who stayed awake all night, making sure every child had what they needed. I had forgotten what it felt like to do something that mattered, she told him as they watched the children play games that mixed traditions from their various homeworlds. For centuries I have attended ceremonies and signed documents and smiled at the right times. But this feels real. This is who you really are, Jake said. The person you were meant to be before duty and politics got in the way. Their secret. Operation could not stay hidden forever. On the 4th day, Emperor Vorthek discovered what they had been doing in his rage, shook the crystal walls of the palace. He summoned both Jake and Lysandra to the throne room for a confrontation that would change everything. You have betrayed me, he roared at his queen. You have made me look weak in front of the entire empire by countermanding my orders. I have saved innocent lives, Lysandra replied, standing straighter than Jake had ever seen her. Something we should have done together. And you, human, the Emperor turned his burning gaze on Jake. You have corrupted my queen with your soft sentiment and foolish ideals. You will leave this world immediately and never return. The children need more time to recover before they can be moved to permanent homes, Jake said calmly. Give us 1 more week and then I will go without protest. You will go now, Vorthek snarled. And if I see you near my queen again, I will have you executed for treason against the crown. Jake looked at Lysandra and saw her watching him with an expression he had never seen before. There was gratitude and admiration, and something deeper that made his heart beat faster. I understand, Your Majesty, Jake said, But before I go, I want Queen Lysandra and everyone in this room to know something. The work we did together to save those children is the most important thing I have ever been part of. She showed courage and compassion that would make any human proud to know her. As guards moved to escort Jake away, Lysandra stepped forward. "Wait," she said, and her voice carried the authority of 3 centuries of royal breeding. "I have something to say." The emperor looked shocked that she would dare interrupt his judgment, but Lysandra continued. "This human has shown me what leadership really means. Not the power to make others obey, but the strength to do what is right even when it is difficult. He has reminded me of who I used to be and who I could still become." "Silence," Vorthik commanded, but for the first time. In their long marriage, Lysandra did not obey. The morning after Jake was banished from the palace, Queen Lysandra woke to find her world completely changed. Emperor Vorthik had not spoken to her since her defiance in the throne room, communicating only through servants and written commands. She was confined to her quarters with guards posted outside her doors. But worse news came with the sunrise. High Minister Corvin arrived with a scroll bearing the imperial seal and an expression of barely contained disgust. "His Majesty has issued a new decree," he announced. "The refugee children you harbored illegally will be executed at noon today." As an example to anyone who might consider defying imperial law, Lysandra felt the world spin around her. He cannot be serious. They are children who have done nothing wrong. The emperor says their presence makes our empire look weak and invites other refugees to come seeking charity we cannot afford, Corvin replied. He also commands that you witness the executions from the palace balcony so you can see the consequences of your disobedience. After Corvin left, Lysandra sank into a chair and stared at her hands. For 300 years, she had told herself that her silence and obedience served the greater good of the empire. She had convinced herself that Vorthik's harsh methods were necessary to maintain order and prosperity. But now she could no longer pretend that the man she had married was anything other than a monster. She thought about Jake and the stories. He had told her about human leaders who had chosen to sacrifice their own safety to protect innocent people. She remembered his words about hope being what makes people strong enough to work for something better. Most of all, she remembered the way he had looked at her in the gardens when she spoke of her old dreams, as if he could see the person she used to be and believed she could be that person again. At 11:30, guards came to escort her to the execution balcony. They led her through corridors filled with servants who looked away rather than meet her eyes. Word of the impending executions had spread through the palace, and everyone knew she was responsible for the children's fate. The balcony overlooked the main courtyard where a platform had been erected for the executions. 200 young refugees from a dozen different worlds stood in chains, while thousands of Zephyrian citizens gathered to watch them die. Emperor Vorthik was already on the balcony, wearing his ceremonial armor and looking pleased with himself. "I hope you are satisfied with your mercy," he said without looking at her. "Today our people will learn what happens when sentiment overrules strength." Lysandra watched the frightened children below and felt something break inside her chest. Among them she could see Kira, the young Zephyrian who had helped Jake move the stone during the challenges. Apparently her association with the refugee rescue had marked her as a traitor as well. "Those children trusted me to protect them," Lysandra said quietly. "I gave them my word that they would be safe." "Your word means nothing," Vorthik replied. "You are my queen, and you speak only with my voice. You have forgotten your place, and now everyone will see what happens to those who defy the natural order." The executioner raised his weapon, and Lysandra closed her eyes, unable to watch. But instead of the sound of death, she heard a familiar voice calling out from the crowd. "Stop this madness," Jake shouted as he pushed through the gathered Zephyrians. He was supposed to be on his ship leaving the system, but somehow he had returned. Those children are under human diplomatic protection. Emperor Vorthik leaned over the balcony, railing with fury in his voice. I banished you, human. You have no authority here, and no right to interfere. I am invoking the ancient right of Champion's Challenge, Jake called back. Any citizen of the Empire has the right to challenge an imperial decree by offering single combat with the Emperor's chosen representative. A murmur went through the crowd. The ancient right had not been invoked in over 1,000 years, but it was still part of Zephyrian law. Vorthik could not refuse without looking weak in front of his people. You would die for alien children you barely know, the Emperor asked with disbelief. Yes, Jake replied without hesitation, because that is what decent people do. They protect those who cannot protect themselves. Lysandra felt her heart stop as she realized what Jake was doing. He was sacrificing himself to give her one last chance to save the children. Even if he somehow won the combat, he would have made an enemy of the most powerful being in 12 star systems. Very well, Vorthik snarled, but I will not send a champion. I will face you myself, and when I kill you, your friends will watch your body burn before the children die. The crowd moved back to create space for the combat, while palace guards brought weapons and armor. Jake accepted a simple sword and basic protective gear, while the Emperor donned his full Imperial battlesuit with energy shields and plasma weapons. This is not a fair fight, Lysandra called out desperately. The Emperor has centuries of combat experience and weapons far superior to anything you offer the challenger. Fairness is for the weak, Vorthik replied. Let the human die knowing that his sentiment and idealism mean nothing against real power. The combat began with the Emperor attacking like a storm of lightning and steel. His plasma weapons painted bright streaks through the air, while his energy shields deflected Jake's desperate attempts to fight back. It was clear that Jake could not win through superior skill or strength. But as the fight continued, something strange began to happen. Jake was not trying to defeat the Emperor. Instead, he was using every technique he had learned during his challenge matches to simply survive and protect others. When Vorthik's attacks threatened the crowd, Jake moved to intercept them. When plasma bolts flew toward the children, Jake threw himself in their path. The Zephyrian citizens began to see what Lysandra already knew. Jake was not fighting for glory or personal gain. He was fighting for an ideal that said every innocent life had value worth defending. Why will you not die? Vorthik screamed as his attacks grew wilder and more desperate. You cannot win. You cannot save them. Why do? You keep fighting. Because it is right. Jake gasped as he blocked another energy blast with his damaged sword. Because those children deserve to live and grow up and have dreams of their own. Because someone has to stand up for what is decent in this universe. Queen. Lysandra watched the man she had grown to love sacrifice himself for principles he would never abandon, and felt the last chains of her old life break apart. 300 years of obedience in silence ended in a single moment of perfect clarity. She stood up from her chair and removed the crown from her head. Then she threw it down into the courtyard, where it shattered against the stone with a sound like breaking glass. I renounce my title as Queen of Zephyria, she announced in a voice that carried across the entire courtyard. I renounce my marriage to a tyrant who murders children, and I choose to stand with the human who has shown me what real honor looks like. A fighting stopped as everyone stared at her in shock. No Zephyrian royal had ever abdicated their position in the entire history of the Empire. You have lost your mind, Vorthik said. You are my queen, and you will remain my queen until death. No, Lysandra replied as she walked toward the stairway that led down to the courtyard. I choose who I am and who I stand with. I choose Jake Morrison and the ideals he represents over the crown that has made me a prisoner for 3 centuries. As she descended the steps, palace guards moved to stop her, but something amazing happened. The Zephyrian citizens in the crowd began to move aside to create a path for her. Many of them had been inspired by Jake's selfless courage and Lyssandra's dramatic stand for justice. "Stop her," Vorthik commanded his guards. "Arrest them both for treason." But when the guards moved forward, they found their way blocked by hundreds of ordinary Zephyrians who had decided they were tired of serving an emperor who valued power more than mercy. Lysandra reached Jake's side and took his hand as they faced the emperor together. "We are leaving this world," she announced. "And we are,"